I didn't have any choice. I was contracted.
Oh, okay.
It was not my choice.
Okay.
Although I thought it was a reputable film, the only thing that's hard to believe is the shark was still looking for me.
John Hancock and Dorothy Tristan were no longer attached to Jaws 2. With no writer and no director, the producers of Jaws 2 turned to Carl Gottlieb for immediate help. Universal had turned down Gottlieb earlier, as they thought he cost too much money, and now they were really shelling out. Of course, Gottlieb was the most credited writer from the first Jaws, and he stayed on location at Fort Walton Beach, Florida, and worked from his hotel room. Whenever he left his room, he was asked by any remaining cast and crew how it was going, and after a few weeks, he didn't like leaving his room because everyone hounded him about it. He was so tired of repeating himself countless times on a daily basis. Steven Spielberg heard about the trouble on the film and felt a bit responsible for the franchise and thought maybe he should return to help Jaws 2. He had doodled down a spec script based on the prequel idea first pitched to him that involved the Indianapolis disaster. The studio was intrigued, and they even got into talks about moving forward. But when it came up to drawing up a deal, Columbia had Steven locked in a contract, and he could not participate in any project until he finished all post-production to Close Encounters of the Third Kind. This meant Steven would be unavailable for several months. It seemed obvious that the studio needed to wait for him, but of course, they didn't wait at all, and moved forward to find a new director. The studio began vetting directors, but Joe Alves told them they didn't have the time and needed to find someone quick that could come in now and shoot fast with quality. This was now the moment Verna Fields had been waiting for. Everyone knew she wanted to make this film, and it was suggested by Ned Tannen she be the next director of Jaws 2, a role she had never done before in any film previously. To compensate for her obvious lack of experience, it was suggested that Joe Alves would become the main director. That way Verna could pull the strings. However, poor Verna's hopes were shot down by the Directors Guild of America because there was a rule that stated if a director from a project was terminated, an executive from that company could not replace said director. In fact, Robert Aldrich himself, who was the head of the DGA at the time, told Sid Sheinberg in front of many witnesses, "No, you will not replace a DGA director with one of your executives or anyone else on the picture. It simply will not happen." Now that Verna Fields or Joe Alves had no chance to become the directors, they needed a replacement fast. And it was Joe Alves who suggested Jeannot Szwarc, who made many television episodes under extreme time constraints. Jeannot was also known for a film called Bug. They sent Jeannot the current script, and he really didn't like it. They asked him what he would do, and he said the action scenes were fine. And in this situation, he would film the action scenes first, while rewriting a lot of the character scenes and shoot them later. They liked his idea, and Ned Tannen offered him the job, but warned him the film was a mess, and it was going to be tough. To compensate the director, he asked him what he wanted. A multi-picture deal? A large profit share? Jeannot then did something really unexpected. He told Ned just to shake his hand, and that he would owe him a favor in the future if the film was saved. Tannen agreed, and this favor would later become Jeannot's next wonderful film, which we will cover in our final video of this series. The heads of the studio knew that Jeannot could be easily controlled, being a new director. The first thing Sheinberg did was to corner the director about getting his wife Lorraine a bigger part in the film, as well as being on the boat to save the kids later in the film. Jeannot would comply to his wishes. As ridiculous as this sounds, Jeannot had only 1 week from the moment he was hired to prep before filming began again. In that time, he scrambled to tweak scenes in the film and was allowed to add some things like the character of Deputy Hendricks returning, thus helping continuity. When Kramer was called back, he was overjoyed to learn his part was bigger and that the other deputy character was gone. The toughest thing Jeannot did was rewriting all of the teenagers of the film, and this meant that many of the kids cast were fired and new ones were put in their place. When filming stopped, most were released under the idea that they would return, but in truth, there was no way of knowing who was going and who was staying. Most returned to their homes, but many kept in touch with Ann Dusenberry, who was under Universal contract, and she was in touch with a lot of people at the studio and had a list of all her castmates. Whenever there was word of who was let go, she would somberly cross off names from the cast and either be the bearer of bad news or salvation for another day. Even though everyone was still being paid during this time, there was no guarantee they would be paid the next day. There was no choice but to just sit and wait to see if they made it or not. This brings us to the decimation and brutality put upon the teens and young adults cast in the film, and the fates that befell them. Here is who made it and who didn't. Karen Corboy, who played Lucy, would later be replaced by Cindy Grover. Cindy, like Karen, was hired during the Hancock period, but didn't film anything for him. Rather, she just rehearsed. The reason the change occurred was because Sarah Holcomb was fired by director John D. Hancock. Then they asked Karen to take over her character of Angela. Karen was let go by Jeannot as the character of Angela was changed to Jackie Peters, who would be played by Donna Wilkes, thus leaving Karen Corboy as an unfortunate dismissal. John Dukakis, who played Paulo, or Paul Lohman, was a survivor from start to finish, both character and actor. G. Thomas Dunlap, who played Timmy Weldon, was hired in June 1977. The character of Timmy was supposed to be Keith Gordon's brother in the Hancock script, but after he was off the project, they changed this character to Doug's best friend. Another character that survived from start to finish was Tina Wilcox, played by Ann Dusenberry, who was none other than Miss Amity herself. David Elliott was cast as Reeves Vaughn, later renamed Larry Vaughn Jr., who is the son of the mayor. This character started out as a bully in Hancock's script and then was changed to the cocky rich kid in Jeannot's script. Elliott would survive to play that part to the finish line. Lily Knight played a character named Kathy, who was the best friend of Laura and was to be her emotional support. This character would be completely cut in the Jeannot version. Lenora May was cast as the character of Laura, who was originally the girlfriend of Mike Brody, and was heartbroken when he began going out with another girl. Lily Knight's character, Kathy, was supposed to be her best friend, who would help her with her sorrows. Laura would be cut completely in the Jeannot version. Nancy Sawyer was originally cast as Brooke, but she was recast by Gigi Vorgan, who was the cousin of Jackie Peters. When it came to young Sean Brody, Ricky Schroeder was cast first. Ricky was then terminated during the change of directors to Mark Gilpin. Apparently, it was stated that Ricky couldn't be scared or get emotional on cue. John Hancock responded to this claim forcefully. God, that's such crap. Yes, he could. It's crazy to suggest otherwise, and it's just not right. Ricky did the champ with John Voight a year or so later, and everybody knows this kid could deliver emotion in bucketfuls. What was later discovered was that Mark Gilpin initially lost to Ricky Schroeder for the part of Sean Brody during early casting. Ricky was selected by John Hancock, but Verna Fields liked Gilpin more. So, when Hancock was out of the picture, Verna began lobbying for her choice to take the part from Ricky. Whether Jeannot agreed with her or felt pressured to make the change, we don't know. But what we do know is that Verna Fields got her way again. Skip Singleton, who would play Patrick, stated he was let go because he wanted to go to his sister's wedding, so they fired him. He would be replaced by Ben Marley. The character of Patrick was Lucy's love interest in the film. Gary Springer was always destined to be Mike Brody's best friend from the start of the Hancock version to the final product. At first, Andy was to be nerdy-like, with braces, and was bullied by Rhys Vaughn. However, in Jeannot's version, Andy would transform into a true best friend, analogous to a rock who would become more hero than anything. Alan Stock was originally cast as Eddie Marchand. However, he was recast by Gary Dubin. Eddie was Tina Wilcox's boyfriend that seemed to focus on only one thing, her. Martha Swatek was a world-class windsurfer. She was hired during the Hancock regime and was always the person to ferry young Sean Brody in both versions of this film. Brian Utman was the first person to play Doug Fetterman, who has a very detailed story about his termination during the Hancock period. He was out rehearsing, and someone from transportation went into his hotel room, packed all his bags, and then they brought them to the production office, where he was fired out of the blue. He was then taken to the airport. Brian sat in the first-class area of the plane, crying over the obviously planned and callous termination. Utman then stated that none other than Roy Scheider sat next to him out of the blue to console him. He said John Hancock was the one who fired me and that he was a royal pain in the you-know-what. But he said, don't worry. He extended a hand of friendship for the future. He lived in New York, as did I. He was very friendly to me, and he told me to call him whenever I could. He gave me his personal phone number. He said the director was extremely disorganized and insecure, and, in his opinion, he wouldn't last. After this, Keith Gordon was given the part of Doug Fetterman. But Keith told Hancock he was Brian's friend, and therefore didn't want to play that role. In the end, Keith was given no choice in the matter. Billy Van Zandt was originally cast as Sideburns, or Quint's son, in the Hancock version. As Hancock's script evolved, Sideburns would become a more villainous teen who sided with Larry Vaughn Jr. Then he would go out boating with the other kids, and when things turned bad, the teens needed to work together to survive. In this version, which was shot partially, Sideburns would die in the water, much like Eddie in the film. Scheider would grab him to pull him out of the water, and only his upper half would come out. After Jeannot came on board, he was recast to play Bob, the best friend of Larry Vaughn Jr. Zandt's character was named Bob specifically by Gottlieb because he remembered that Billy Van Zandt was to be chewed in half in Hancock's version, and then he bobbed in the water. So his name was an inside joke for those that knew about it. Tegan West originally played Mike Brody. He would be replaced by Mark Gruner in Jeannot's version. When filming started, they focused on the most difficult action scenes first, while Gottlieb doctored the script. Like the first film, pages of revisions came in day by day, and many had to adapt quickly to changing scenes. To survive making this film with the time constraints, Jeannot leaned on Joe Alves and his second unit to get many extra shots done. Jeannot focused on the actors and characters in the script mainly. That was his number one priority. Gottlieb would eventually finish his script on July 28, 1977. Scheider did not have any interest in Jeannot for whatever reason. After the script changes, Scheider was very upset that his role was getting less attention while the teenagers and Lorraine were getting more focus, which we will go into detail later. During the shoot, Scheider kept to himself. He did not bond with anyone and actually annoyed a lot of his castmates. One such cast member was Murray Hamilton. Scheider would show up in the morning with script changes he wrote himself, with dialogue intended for Murray, and it irritated the on-screen mayor greatly. He would do the same thing to Jeffrey Kramer, who played his deputy. Sometimes I would come to the set early and Roy would tell me that he had rewritten the scene and it wasn't necessary for me to be in it. So I'd look over to Jeannot and David Brown, who was a consummate gentleman, and they would look back at me and would cover their mouths like they were joking, and they would put me back in the scene. I don't think Roy was happy. When shooting occurred on land, Scheider would do delaying tactics and sit in the sun working on his tan in shorts and a reflector under his chin. Crew members were sent to get him, and he got dressed slowly, did his part, and when cut was called, he would walk away to continue his sunbathing. A lot of folks felt that he did this on purpose to make things difficult for the shoot. Others claimed he was just obsessed with his physical image. When cameraman Michael Butler stated that Scheider's tan was getting darker and darker, thus making it difficult to match the shots with the white beach, a bunch of makers of the film, including the producers, asked him to please stop the tanning for the sake of continuity and camera work. Scheider completely ignored them all and just did as he pleased. In the end, they had to color correct Scheider in the final print because he wouldn't listen to their requests. Now, if you watch the film closely, you can constantly see Brody's changing skin tone from scene to scene. During the Holiday Inn scene, Roy Scheider lost his temper and began yelling at Jeannot in front of the entire crew and extras. Scheider was stating that Jeannot was a TV director who didn't know what he was doing in front of the entire crowd. He would pace back and forth, then leaned into the director, and it angered Murray Hamilton so much to see the display. He would never forgive Roy Scheider from that moment on. Jeannot, not one to back down, put Scheider in his place in front of everyone, and that was the last time Scheider would lose his temper in front of others in public again. These difficulties also fell on some of the teens. As I mentioned before, Scheider was very upset that others were getting more attention than his character, and he would often force changes in the script, causing the younger castmates to continually get smaller and smaller roles. Gary Springer, who played Andy, was a focus to Scheider because Andy became more of a heroic figure in the new changes, and Scheider thought he was the hero. This infuriated him to no end, and he complained about this. As a result, he managed to force Andy to become a smaller character. Even Brody's own son was not immune to Scheider's frustration. According to Mark Gruner, Roy was upset because the character of Mike Brody was getting a close-up bigger than him one day, and made a big stink about it. Joe Alves stated there was a physical altercation between Scheider and Jeannot in Verna Fields' office, and this is verified by the director himself. Now, we don't know exactly what was said, but what is known is that David Brown ended up holding Scheider back, while Verna Fields tried to hold Jeannot back. After the altercation, Jeannot tried to make gestures to Scheider to keep the peace.
Look, Roy, I know I'm spending more time with the kids than I am spending with you, but that's because your experience, a lot of them don't have experience, so I got to give them more time. And that's just common sense.
Yeah.
So after that, he was better.
After some time, Scheider was pretty much hated on the set by many, so much so that Scheider's Mercedes became a target for those who disliked the actor's treatment towards themselves or others. People began urinating on his car in contempt, and it got to the point where they began putting cones around his car to dissuade people from getting near it. Despite the problems with Scheider, the kids had their own problems, and that they were stuck at sea most of the time. When they were not filming, they were training on the water, and when they were filming, they were in the water, and even though they were in Florida, it was turning to fall, and it got a lot colder on the water. What made it worse was that some of them were in short, skimpy clothes. They would have to spend hours freezing, waiting to do shots, and there was little anyone could do about it because setting up shots took forever and it was very difficult. The only sympathetic thing they could do was send the kids some brandy to warm them up, and many would later joke about it in tales from the film. Now, a thing to remember about Jeannot is that he was used to television. Doing an episode of television in 3 days was the norm for him, and when he came to the set of Jaws 2, he quickly learned that it was nothing like that. His biggest problem was the special effects crew, with the shark and the setups on the ocean. It was very time-consuming, and it really got under his skin. He just didn't have the patience for it, and this often rubbed the effects crew the wrong way, especially when he would sit there waiting for the crew to finish up their setups. Sometimes, after waiting a bit, he would loudly announce that he was getting bored, but the effects crew couldn't go any faster. In post, editing also had its issues. Joe Alves shot many second unit work, including the helicopter scenes, and when the girl nuked her boat up as well. When Jeannot got to the editing room, he took most of Alves' shots out of the movie. However, Verna Fields would come right in behind him and put them right back in without telling him. It was a tug of war from start to finish. When it came to the score, John Williams asked Jeannot what he wanted, and Jeannot was completely hands-off. He told Williams he had complete trust in him and to do whatever he thought best. It was the right call, and I have to be honest, I actually prefer the Jaws 2 soundtrack way more than the first one. Not only does the second score have most of the cues from the first film, but it adds great melodies to the second one, particularly the harp tracks. I can go all day listening to the main title track in a loop, over and over again. It also has the happy-go-lucky scores we know from the first Jaws, along with the somber tracks as well. It is classic John Williams, and I adore it. Merchandise for the film arrived before the movie, and the first thing released was the movie novel by Hank Searls. It's a great treasure to read because it's based off of Howard Sackler, Dorothy Tristan, and John Hancock's version of the script. When the manuscript for the novel was finished, it was turned in before Gottlieb came onto the project. The release of this novel occurred April 19th, 1978, 2 months before the sequel opened. It was common up to the 2000s for movie novels to be released before films, as they were more celebrated in the past. However, this novel showed most of the changes from the Hancock film to the Jeannot film. Of course, I would claim that the greatest merchandise of the film was the trading card set, as I am a collector of movie trading cards from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and the Jaws 2 cards looked great with their black borders and 15 cents a pack price tag. There were 59 cards to get and 11 stickers. Then there was the fun stuff like Craft Master coloring poster sets with felt tip markers, activity books, comic books depicting the Tristan Hancock version of the film, the Jaws 2 costume, the Jaws 2 log, a Jaws 2 cookbook, t-shirts, posters, of course, the wonderful soundtrack as well. There was even Jaws 2 themed Coca-Cola cup sets that were sold at participating concession stands for Slurpees back in the day that included 5 cups. In the end, the film would cost $20 million, which was the most expensive movie Universal Pictures ever produced at that time. It was released on June 16, 1978, to 640 theaters in the U.S. and Canada. The month of June 1978 at the box office started out interesting, with a wide variety of film tastes at the beginning of the month. On June 2nd, starting with another sequel to The Bad News Bears Go to Japan, then there was Chuck Norris's Good Guys Wear Black, which made $18.3 million. Then there was Capricorn 1, a film about a faked Mars landing with Elliot Gould, O.J. Simpson, Hal Holbrook, and James Brolin. The last movie of the week was the Mark Hamill, Annie Potts vehicle, where a boy hunts for his stolen car in Corvette Summer, which made a healthy $15.5 million.
We didn't want no Cokes. Who said I was thirsty? Want my car.
You see, Mark Hamill took his angry outbursts out on people back then too. During the week of June 9th, Damien was back to carry out his Dark Father's work in Damien Omen 2, which made a successful $26.5 million, to be followed by Disney's The Cat from Outer Space. Walter Hill had a new movie with Bruce Dern and Ryan O'Neal called The Driver on June 10th, which made $4.9 million. On the day of Jaws 2 release, June 16th, 1978, there was some stiff competition, most of all from Grease, which was released on the same day. You know, that wonderful movie from a bygone era that taught young people to just change who you are, to nab the person you want? I don't care about the message, though. I still think the movie was fun because I remember how much people enjoyed it back then, and Olivia Newton-John was just the coolest in the 70s and 80s. Anyways, Grease would end up being the #1 movie of the year, making a gargantuous $190 million, and it was a cultural phenomenon, thanks to the cast and music. During the first week of Jaws 2 opening, it pulled in $9.8 million and won the #1 spot. However, in no time, Grease would take over the #1 spot after word of mouth spread for the musical. During June 23rd, The Cheap Detective and the weird boxing kangaroo named Matilda also had no fangs against the big shark or Grease. However, on June 28th, Heaven Can Wait would shake up the box office with its good writing and fun portrayal of the afterlife. It would eventually make $81.6 million. Also that week was Convoy and Roger Moore's The Wild Geese. By the second week of July, specifically the 14th, two films would finally start to push the big shark out of the box office. First up was the initial team-up of Chevy Chase and Goldie Hawn in their very successful Foul Play, which nabbed $44.9 million. Also released was another box office hit with Burt Reynolds called Hooper. Hooper would make $78 million, beating Jaws out of the 6th spot at the end of the year. Also that week, a smaller film with Michael Caine called The Swarm was released, where killer bees terrorizes Texas. In the end, Jaws would make $77.7 million at the box office, earning the 7th highest grossing spot for the year. Though the film was not as successful as the first, it did make $106.1 internationally, thus finally nabbing it $187.8 million worldwide. When Jaws came out, I was 6, and to be honest, the first film I would see that summer was Star Wars, during its re-release at the Sundance Kid Drive-In at Oregon, Ohio, so the film went completely under the radar for me. I didn't know films at that young age, and after I saw Star Wars during the early summer, it was all I could think about. When I wasn't playing with my action figures, collecting the trading cards of the film, which I still have today, by the way, or looking at scenes through my trusty viewfinder, I was pretending to be in a galaxy far, far away. So every movie, except Grease, kind of slipped by my radar for the rest of the year. The radio constantly played music from the movie Grease at that time, and that's the only reason I knew anything about it. But I simply didn't care to see it, because if it wasn't Star Wars, I simply didn't care. It would not be until I returned from Germany in 1980 that I would eventually see Jaws 2 on cable. By then, I was an avid moviegoer who had seen a lot of films at the theater with my family at the Post Cinemas in Gießen, Germany during 1979. So when I came home, I watched everything I could. As a boy, I liked Jaws, but I liked Jaws 2 more, since there were kids in it and I could relate to it more. I suppose the real question is, how do I feel about it now? And I will cover that in our next video, which means that's it for this one. Our next video should wrap up our coverage of Jaws 2, as I'm impatient to get to my single video covering the mess that was Jaws 3 and 4. I'll see you then, as I'm simply dying to rip into those films.
You guys are killing me up here. I'm dying here. I'm dying. I love this business.
If you like what you see here, click like and subscribe. Super thanks helps, but sharing helps more.